Hi, and welcome to Bible365 with Kathy Carter. That's me, and I am going through the Bible in 365 days. I am using the One Year Chronological Bible reading plan. So if you've been with me every day, you're hearing this every day. But my introduction is that it is the 1 year, which is a name brand, chronological Bible reading plan. You can download the free printable online at the One Year Chronological Bible online.com. Or you can purchase one of their Bibles that they create, which is either the NIV, the NLT, or the New King James Version, which just has a daily layout for you. So the Bible is made in such a way that every day has the readings that we would do. And so every day you just open it and do your readings. Obviously a little bit easier if you buy it, but it is free if you just download their reading plan, which I did for several years before I got the actual Bible. So actually before I even knew the Bible existed. So if you are with me and if you have been following along, we are coming to the end of the book of Numbers. And so I'm actually really excited because we're about 2.5 months in, and I think we're coming down to our fifth book. So the end of our fifth book. So the book of Numbers, this is day 71, and this is Numbers 34 through 36. And so these are those last couple of chapters of the book of Numbers. Most of what we've been in at this point has been Moses. Moses is the one who is likely writing it. If not him, somebody's writing it for him, but it is essentially Moses's, not necessarily diary. It's essentially his journal of the time where he is with the Israelites. And so it started in the book of Exodus, continued through the book of Leviticus, and now we're in the book of Numbers. And it will continue with one more book in the book of Deuteronomy. And at this point, we have seen that Moses has saved the Israelite people. God has given him through God, right? This is all God that's doing it. So when I say Moses is doing the actual work, but God is the one who provided him with the power. God is the one who saved the people. And so through all of these miracles, God saved the people of Israel from being slaves. They were slaves for hundreds of years under the Egyptians. God heard them, raised them up, saved them from there, moved them to Mount Sinai, where he gave them the 10 Commandments and many other things that they are to be following, because they are a people set apart and holy, unlike anybody else in the world at that time. God has seen them and elected them and chosen them as a people group to be essentially his face for the rest of the world. So when the rest of the world sees the Israelites, they see God. They know that it is the one true God that they are worshiping, and that is with them. And then he moved them from Mount Sinai, is moving them to the land of Canaan, which he promised Abraham way back in the book of Genesis. And this is the land that they will live in and own essentially for eternity. So this is the promise that was made to them. We will see a lot of other things that happen, because they were actually supposed to get the land of Canaan, if you guys remember, not that long ago, but they didn't, because they were scared of the people that were living in it, and they were afraid that God wasn't going to do what he said he was going to do. And so they thought that people were going to kill them. And so they were afraid, and then God punished that generation, and that generation had to walk through the wilderness for 40 years. However, now we're coming upon that time where they are getting into the land. Yesterday, there was land right outside of Israel that was promised to 2.5 tribes, half of Manasseh and Gad and Reuben. And now today, Moses is going to talk a little bit more about what the rest of the land looks like. So if I move just right into, remember we're in Numbers 34 through 36. So if I move into verse 1, it says, the Lord said to Moses, command the Israelites and say to them, which kind of is what he's consistently saying all the time. And I want to make the point here, because I hear a lot about getting following God, or who made the world, or who did this and who did that. The Bible isn't real. It's just a bunch of stories, whatever that might be. And in this story, so to speak, Moses and Aaron at one point, but Aaron has passed away since then, they're having conversations with God. So this isn't a translation upon a translation about a mishmash of things that they look around and they see as true. And so, of course, we have to believe that they're actually talking to God. But they are saying that they are actually talking to God. And so what we have to decide is whether we believe they are talking to the God that created the earth, or if they're just pulling this stuff randomly out of thin air, or if they're not talking to God and they're just kind of saying things that they see around them. So we need to make that decision as we read this, whether we want to believe that this is true or not, right? So that's sort of our job as people who believe. Do we believe that what he's saying is true? Do we believe that he was actually talking to God, or do we believe something different? And that would really make the decision on what your faith looks like. So I'm saying that because in every single chapter here, we say that Moses says, or that God says, these are the things that you tell them because I tell you. And so Moses is, God is kind of always speaking to Moses. So the Lord said to Moses, command the Israelites and say to them, when you enter Canaan, the land that will be allotted to you as an inheritance, it is to have these boundaries. So right now, all he's doing is he's lining up the land of Canaan. And so God tells Moses, when you guys get in there, because remember, this is a promise. They're not there yet. They're still on the other side, but they're getting to this point where they're preparing to go into the land that God has promised them. They recognize there's already people in that land, right? So what is that going to look like when they go in? And what's going to happen once they go in? So God is assuring them that when they go in, this is the area in which you're going to inherit. This is the area that's going to be yours when you go in there. And so if you look at a map, because he's going to give all the boundaries of what it all looks like, essentially it is current day Israel. And so if you see most of those boundaries plugged out, that's mostly what they give. They're going to give to them. That's considered at that time the land of Canaan. Obviously not Israel, because the tribes aren't in there yet. So that's the land of Canaan that they're eventually going to go in. And so he's just, at this point, he's discussing all the borders, what all the borders look like. It's kind of bordered by the desert. It's bordered a little bit by the sea, and then it's bordered by the desert on the other side, right? So we find out all of those things. So verse 12 says, this will be your land with its boundaries on every side. So he's telling them only as far as they can go. That's going to be your land. And then that's all you're getting. So before they even go in, they know the area in which God is giving them. They're not to take anything more. They're not to take anything less. All right. And then I want to move to verse 16. In verse 16, he's discussing how so it's only going to be split amongst 9.5 tribes. And so it says these 2.5 tribes have received their inheritance east of the Jordan across from the Jericho toward the sunrise. So if you remember, again, I said last time, Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh have received different land. So now all of this land is going to be given to them by lot, according for 9.5 tribes. All right, so let's move on to chapter 35. The Lord said to Moses, these are the names of the men who are to assign the land for you as an inheritance. So the people who are given the power to assign as the inheritance are Eleazar, who is Aaron's son, who is now the high priest, and Joshua, son of Nun. So this is the person who is taking over for Moses as the leader of the people. So Eleazar took over for Aaron as the leader of the high priests, or the high priest as the leader of the priests and the Levites. And then Joshua took over for Moses. So we have those two are now going to be in charge. And those two are the two that, because by the time they get in the land, if you remember, Moses isn't going to be there anymore. So the two of them are going to do this, and they're going to do it by lot. They're going to do it with that dice. And they're going to do it not just the two of them, but also with the heads of all the other tribes. So they give a list of names of all the other heads of the tribes that are going to be there. And so I just find it interesting that, and maybe at the time, all of these other systems were created to look much the same. But I find it really interesting because they don't necessarily have a king. This isn't necessarily a kingdom, especially because they're a traveling people. So it's not really a kingdom, but there is a leader and there is a priest. So these two are essentially the two people that are the people that make the ultimate decisions, but they also have a set of leaders from every tribe. So it's more, I want to call it a democracy, but it's all led by God, but it's still this bigger system than it just being a monarchy that has this one king that makes all the rules for all the people in the area. So it's just a really interesting system that's been set up, which some of us would say it makes it definitely a little bit more fair. But ultimately, God is the one who makes the decisions for these people, and the people just transfer these decisions to the rest of the Israelite tribe. All right, so moving on, that's it for this area. So this is one leader of each tribe, and then I'm just going to move on to the next chapter. So in Numbers 35, starting with verse 1, we go, on the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho, the Lord said to Moses, command the Israelites to give Levites towns to live in. So if you guys remember, again, another thing that I found pretty interesting, if you remember when they were traveling, they had the tabernacle was on the inside, and then the Levites surrounded the tabernacle. So they were this bridge between the people and and God, right? Because God's house was living inside there. And then they had all of the people surrounding all of the Levites on the outside. Well, when they move into the land, so when they kind of have a permanent place, that's not going to happen anymore. Every town is going to have a tribe according to how big the land is. So let's say Manasseh has this massive amount of land. They'll probably get a couple extra towns for the Levites to live in. Then maybe somebody smaller who has a tiny little area that might only get one town that would have the Levites in it. So depending on the size of the tribe and the amount of people in the tribe, that's how many Levite towns they get. Now, in these Levite towns, they have some refuge cities. And so the refuge cities are for people to be able to go to when they have murdered somebody. And so this is to keep the avenger from killing them. They actually go in and they're being protected, but they're not being protected just for protection's sake. They're being protected so they can eventually go on trial. So there is a point and purpose for them to be in these refuge cities. They may eventually go back and live in these refuge cities depending on what the verdict comes down to, but they are in these refuge cities. On top of that, the Levites are going to have a town, and then around the town, so they have a town where they live, and then around the town, they're going to have pastures. So like I think it says 2,000 cubits. They have pastures around the town so they can have all their livestock and everything in order for them to live, make the burnt offerings, and do all of those things. So they've set everything up individually. So now it doesn't come down to just a high priest, although it will, because we're going to see that as well. But all these little towns have Levites as well, so they can do certain things. All right, so I want to go to, so it says 6 of the towns you live in, the Levites will be cities of refuge in which to which a person who has killed someone may flee. And then you're going to give them 42 other towns. So in total, they're going to have 48 towns together with their pasture lands. All right, moving on to verse 9. Then the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into Canaan, select some towns to be your cities of refuge to which a person who has killed someone accidentally may flee. So again, they're talking about this idea of having them in there until, and they're waiting to stand trial. So while they wait to stand trial, they're in there. And then they're going to have 3 of these in the land of Israel in Canaan, and then they're going to have 3 outside, because remember we have those 2.5 tribes outside. So they're sort of equally spreading these towns apart. And I mean, I guess in some ways it's a reminder of us, it's like a jail for us, right? So they'd be this protection area for them, same as it would be here. So nobody takes the law into their own hands. However, what I find interesting is if they, for any reason, leave this area, then they actually can be killed by their avenger. So if they decide for whatever reason they don't like being in that town, they don't like to be in the city of refuge, and they want to run, then at that point, if the avenger knows that, then they can actually kill that person. All right. Moving to verse 30. This is how we find out who the murderer, like whether they get convicted or not. They have to actually, and I'm going to read it so we can be exact here. So in verse 30 it says, anyone who kills a person is to be put to death as a murderer only on the testimony of witnesses, but not put to death on the testimony of just one witness. So this is furthering sort of the proof that they actually are a murderer and they're not just taken revenge on by somebody else. So again, he's kind of creating this judicial system, this fair judicial system in which someone isn't convicted until multiple people recognize that they did something wrong. So in verse 31, it says there will be no ransom for that person. So you can't accept any money or anything for that person. And they are not allowed to go back and live on their own until the high priest dies. So the time that they have to spend in there is until the death of the high priest. And then in 33, it says, don't pollute the land where you are. Bloodshed pollutes the land. So overall, I mean, God doesn't want you guys, God doesn't want us to murder each other. So overall, it's this idea of polluting our land is giving bloodshed. Overall, what it's saying is here we go again with this idea of clean and unclean, right? So if you're polluting it, making it dirty by committing these crimes, by murdering other people, these are things that are considered unclean towards the Lord, and things that are not to be done. So again, this thing I feel like we're going to take sort of for granted. Like, of course, you don't want us to murder people. But the reality, unfortunately, is it does happen. So there's a system in which to help that. All right, let me just read 34. He finishes up with, it says, do not defile the land where you live and where I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell among the Israelites. So he's also reminding them that he's still in there. He's dwelling in their land with them. He is there to be protecting them and to punish them when they need to. And so he is always with them in the tabernacle. All right, guys, let's finish up with verse 30 or chapter 36. And in chapter 36, it says, the family heads of the clan of Gilead, son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, who were the clans of the descendants of Joseph, came and spoke before Moses, the leaders. So here we go. This tribe of Manasseh, this is where, if you guys remember, that Zelophehad, that guy who had only daughters, the daughters went, after he died, the daughters went and said, we need to inherit some land. And God said, if there are no sons, the daughters inherit the land. So at this point, the daughters have inherited the land. But of course, the problem is now coming that if the daughters marry, and if they marry outside of the tribe, the land is the land, right? So the land belongs to the people group. So let's say the tribe of Judah, right? That entire land that Judah owns is Judah's land. If you are one of the Judites, you would live in that land, and part of that land would belong to you. It's the promise to you that would eventually be an inheritance to you. And if you remember all those things back in there, the land of Jubilee, remember, if they move and then they have to come back to the land in the land of Jubilee, or in the year of Jubilee, right? They have to come back to originally where they lived, to their original tribe. And then those people have to go back to their, so all of those things matter, right? Like, your land is your land. God is keeping it separate and unique. So even the land in which it is, he doesn't want it to get muddied and all separate. So he wants each tribe to have their own area. So what happens when these girls have this land and they decide to marry, let's say, because they're Manasseh, so they live in the tribe of Manasseh, and they marry, again, I'm going to go Judah, they marry a Judite. And so where's the land to go? Who's going to own the land? Right? And so there's sort of like this argument and discussion in what happens with the land. And ultimately, God comes down and he says, if they want to keep the land, then they must marry inside their tribe. And so any woman who owns any land, or who is ultimately the one who has the land, they must marry inside their tribe in order to keep the land inside the tribe. So to keep that protected, they stay inside there. So, and then in verse 7, just going to go with, it says in verse 7, it says, no inheritance in Israel is to pass from one tribe to another, for every Israelite shall keep the tribal inheritance of their ancestors. So he wants to keep the land. He wants to keep them in their ancestral tribe, right? And so to protect the land and to protect the people. I'm finishing on that note today. That's the end of Numbers. So as a matter of fact, reading that very last verse of Numbers, it says, these are the commands and regulations the Lord gave Moses to the Israelites on the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from the Jericho. So it's also a reminder of the location in which they're at. They've settled and they're kind of in that area. They're possessing that one area right outside of Canaan. And so they're even telling you like this, he's reiterating all of this outside of the land of Canaan before they go in. So he's giving them kind of these last little bits before they're going to go into the land, what it's going to look like when they get in. So ending Numbers on that note, if you stuck with me through the book of Numbers, I'm super excited that you stuck with it. If you did not stick with it and you just watched the videos, still amazing. Still excited that you're learning about at least what I can give you about the Israelite people. And I'm hoping to go even more because we've got one more book with Moses, so the book of Deuteronomy, and we're going to keep learning about what the Israelites needed to do and to know before they went into the land of Canaan. So if you like this, if this was a blessing to you, I want you to hit the like button. I want you to share it with other people. I want you to subscribe to the channel because that's what's going to get you the video every day. And keep reading. I'll see you next time.